The kind of anti-black racism, that systemic racism that the antiracism movement is meant to supposedly expose and dismantle, that it just doesn't exist. It hasn't existed in this country for many years.
You're watching Restoring America, where we shine a light on the fundamental values of this country and all the reasons why they're worth saving. This week, we're going to talk about one of the left's favorite isms, anti-racism, and whether they even know what that means or what it requires. I'm Kaylee McGee-White, and this is Restoring America. You may remember that back in 2020, when the Black Lives Matter riots were roiling the country, the word anti-racism started popping up everywhere. It was no longer enough to say you weren't a racist, according to influential figures such as Ibram Kendi and Robin DiAngelo. You had to be an anti-racist, by which they mean a person who is still inherently racist, but is at least able to admit as much. Confused? I don't blame you. What you need to know about so-called anti-racism is that it's part of the left's larger diversity, equity, and inclusion framework, the explicit purpose of which is to divide people and categorize them based on immutable characteristics such as skin color. This framework makes some groups victims and others oppressors for no reason other than the way they look. If that sounds racist to you, you'd be right. My guest today has experienced firsthand just how hypocritical this ideology is. He even made a movie about it. But before we get to him, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button, and for more, head to washingtonexaminer.com.
Growing up in the 90s, I never thought much about race. Sure, you noticed, but never really seemed to matter that much, at least not to me.
Being a white, straight, cisgender man, it's the top of the pile.
I'm on the top of the pile. That's me. Am I racist?
I would really appreciate it if you left.
I'm trying to learn. I'm on this journey.
Can you please leave?
Joining me today is Matt Walsh, a certified DEI consultant and the star of the Daily Wire's new film, Am I Racist? Matt, thanks so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to chat with you. So I did watch the movie. I was very excited to go see it in theaters. And one of the scenes that I love is the scene where you're talking about whether it's racist for your daughter to want to dress up as Moana.
My daughter's 4 years old. I am an anti-racist educator, quote unquote. She's still watching Disney movies, and she is choosing a white princess over princesses of color.
Have you talked to her about that?
All the time.
My 3-year-old daughter is her favorite princess is Moana.
Love it.
It's a good sign.
Yeah.
But then I also thought, there's a little bit of cultural appropriation here. She wants to be Moana for Halloween. Mm-hmm. So how do we navigate that? Do I go and buy the Pacific Islander native attire for my white 3-year-old?
I wouldn't. I wouldn't.
But I guess what we might call the Moana problem here is what, on one hand, there's cultural appropriation. On the other hand, there's gravitating towards white characters.
Right.
So it's almost like no matter which way you go, you end up back in racism.
We think every space belongs to us because we live in a white supremacist society.
One of the things that I love the film is that it really shows viewers, rather than tells them, how hypocritical the entire anti-racism philosophy is and how self-defeating the DEI agenda is. Can you explain more about what you discovered while you were filming this in talking with some of these people?
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that, because that was really our goal with the film, was to, as they say, to show not tell, and rather than doing a more traditional documentary where you're sort of presenting the argument and explaining why DEI is harmful and toxic and destructive to society, if we could have me kind of embody this thing and accept it and take it seriously and let it guide me down the path, and by the end of it, people can see where it leads. And so that's really what I learned through making it. It's I sort of already knew the DEI was bad, but I guess one of the big takeaways for me was just seeing how effective these DEI grifters are at brainwashing, people. I know the grifters themselves are in it for the money and the power that they have, the influence that they have over other people. But the real revelatory thing for me was seeing the others, like the people that go to the seminars and buy the books and all of that stuff, to see how so sincerely it seems to me they have fallen prey to this kind of indoctrination.
Yeah, which you especially see in the dinner party scene, where all of these women subject themselves to just being yelled at for a couple of hours straight for really no good reason at all. So why do you think it is that this has become so mainstreamed? Why do people subject themselves to this? Why has anti-racism become really a defining ideology of the left today?
Well, I mean, you could go all the way back. It's kind of like, where do you want to begin in an answer to the question? I think that over the last several years, as systemic racism does not exist. Anti-black systemic racism. I mean, you could argue that systemic racism against white people does exist because of things like affirmative action and DEI policies that corporate America has, where they explicitly exclude certain groups. But the kind of anti-black racism, systemic racism that the anti-racism movement is meant to supposedly expose and dismantle, that it just doesn't exist. It hasn't existed in this country for many years, thankfully. So the reason why you have these DEI people is that they can't accept that. They can't allow that to be the case. They can't say that, okay, well, systemic racism is done, and we're not really racism is not acceptable in society. We don't accept it, and so let's just move on to other issues. They can't do that because then they lose the money, influence, and power. So their job is to just continually convince people that no, you think this isn't an issue, but it is. You think you're not racist, but you are, and that's the game.
And one of the things that I think is great that you point out is that there's no way to win, especially if you are a white person in this ideology. You always are the loser. There's no way to actually be a non-racist or an anti-racist according to their own theory. So where do we go from here? You've released this film to sort of expose the hypocrisy of DEI. What are the next steps for conservatives to really put this ideology in the grave for good?
Well, I think you've got DEI, and then you've got the ideology that is underpinning it. And for DEI itself, the thing that we call DEI, I think thankfully it's on. I'm not going to say it's on its deathbed, but it's heading there, and it's not long for this world. And we know that because everybody kind of is aware of DEI now. And I think for most people, if you get 100 people in a room, you ask them about DEI, it'll have a negative connotation to most of them. But then what you have to look for is, as these companies get away from what we call DEI, because it's so unacceptable now, and it's seen by society as so absurd, they're going to try to repackage these ideas into something else. I don't know what they'll call it. They'll call it something else. That's because the underpinning ideology is still there. This, whatever they call it, the kind of left-wing racial ideology, it still exists. And so after we get rid of DEI, the next step is to go well, now we got to take on that thing itself, and that's going to be a long process because look, it took generations for left-wing racial ideology to become dominant in our culture, and so it's probably going to take generations to get rid of it. But that's the fight.
Yeah, and it seems like one of the best solutions is to sort of make this culturally untenable again, and I think that you're very much so helping do that with this film. So thanks very much. Be sure to check out Am I Racist in theaters, and for more breaking news, exclusive interviews, and conservative views, be sure to check out washingtonexaminer.com.